We talked about two go-to strategies for responding to behaviors are meeting the needs and supporting regulation. Even though sometimes it can seem counterproductive or kind of against what you think you would do, trying to go ahead and meet those needs and supporting that regulation both in for the children and for yourself as well. And then the final thing that we talked about was remembering to target your own behavioral strategies purposely and reviewing the why, the when, and the how of praise, problem solving, and limit setting. Hold on here, give me 1 second. I'm having some problems with my audio. Oops. You guys can hear me okay, right?
I can.
Yeah.
Okay. Yes. Okay, just making sure. For some reason, I'm just having an issue with my computer today. So today's session, again, going to be shorter, and I apologize for that, but I've told you guys before, these are meant to be in-person 2-hour sessions, and so we have to miss out on a lot of handouts and activities, and so it was really activity heavy today, so I apologize, it's going to be shorter. Or you guys can, use that time to do something fun and get out of here. So I apologize in advance for that. But last week, the suggested practice that we talked about was to begin kind of identifying behavior patterns and needs for the kiddos in your home and start to develop a plan for addressing those needs. Did anybody do that? Does anyone want to share anything about that before we get into today's theme? If not, that's okay. I think we have a couple different people than were here last week. I think we only have two of you guys were here last week. So we'll move on to today's theme. So today's theme is called Who Are You? All about identity. And we know that a key developmental process is the growth of a sense of self and an understanding of just individuality and eventually the formation of a really coherent identity. And that usually happens, later in adulthood. And we know that this kind of establishment of a coherent sense of self really advances across the developmental stages. So it does start in infancy, but it's not really going to come to fruition until we're much, much older. So really quick, if you guys want to share, what are some of the roles or characteristics or values that really contribute to each of your own self-concepts? Or what are some of those things that really contribute to understanding who you are? Anyone have any examples that they want to share? No one? No one? So roles, for example. So I've been an older sister all my life. I have 3 younger brothers. And so that's something that really, I feel like defines me. Because I'm the only female in my sibling group and I am the oldest, I've kind of tended to take on a more maternal, caregiving role in my life. And that's just one of the things that kind of defines my identity. So that's just a little example. So be thinking about maybe what are some defining characteristics or roles that you guys might have that really affect your identity as we kind of go through today's session. So we're going to go through just the different developmental stages. And for a lot of you, this is going to be a review or a refresher. But if we start out in infancy, we know that a primary task for babies is really going to be that establishment of trust, both in their environment and in the people around them. We know that infants also work to establish attachments with primary caregivers and just people who consistently meet their needs and develop comfort in interacting with other people. Infants, they're going to be making those basic needs met, whether it's for thirst, hunger, sleep, whatever. They're going to make that known by crying, sending other nonverbal signals. We know that the earliest understanding of self as separate from other occurs during infancy, and the infant becomes aware of the role of other, and really in particular, their primary caregiver as the source of basic need fulfillment. And then self-concept develops and grows as other people respond in predictable ways to the actions, behaviors, and interactions of the infant. Moving on to toddlerhood. This is going to be a stage of, really a stage of exploration. Toddlers have a growing sense of self-awareness and independence, as we all know. And during this phase, toddlers really begin to explore their environment and see the effect that they can have in the world. So for example, if a toddler is sitting in their high chair eating breakfast, and at one point he kind of just like starts to play with his food, moves around, and then he picks up a big handful, kind of looks at you, their caregiver. What do you think is going to happen next? He's probably going to throw the food on the floor, and then kind of look back to you or the caregiver to see your reaction. And this process, these kind of behaviors are likely to be repeated because it creates a sense of personal control and power. It gets a reaction. And so that's kind of an illustration of how they really begin to kind of explore, seeing how they can affect the environment around them. We know that secure attachments to their caregivers provide children the safety to explore their world and different aspects of themselves. We know that children learn whether they can accomplish goals, experiment with fun and like novelty, explore likes and dislikes, things like that. Children who experience trauma, oops, let me see if I can mute this. It's not letting me mute you guys today. I don't know why. So we know that children who've experienced trauma often really limit their exploration to ensure that they remain safe. And they kind of instead rely on these really rigid sense of control and repetition. And without that exploration, children are really limited to what immediately is in their environment, rather than, that possibility of what could be. There's not really any extension there, any exploration. And then the final thing is, we know that toddlers really become aware of others' responses to their actions, kind of like the throwing breakfast on the food thing, or throwing breakfast on the floor thing. So they're really aware of others' responses to their actions and behaviors and interactions, and they're going to notice whether or not adults appear to be happy or angry or approving or disapproving of their behaviors. And they notice whether or not and how adults respond to them. And toddlers are going to see themselves as others kind of see and react to them. And so this is kind of a reflected lens in a sense. And it's going to be incorporated into their early understanding of self. So based on how other people react to them or respond to them, that's going to kind of help them to internalize an identity. On to early childhood. So this is going to be development of more of the concrete self, kind of moving out of toddlerhood and into early childhood. We know that young children have a growing sense of individuality and independence. Again, same with toddlers. It continues to grow, and it's probably not going to stop. They're going to be really curious about their worlds and have an increasing ability to use their imagination and fantasize, things like that. Early childhood is also when preferences become more evident, whether that's favorite food, favorite activities to do, colors, clothing that they like to wear, things like that. So those are going to develop in this stage and begin to really become incorporated into their sense of self, those favorites. Children also might increasingly notice group preferences. So if they're at preschool and, they're going to be noticing more of, hey, what are the other kids wearing? What are the other kids playing with? And they also might start to compare themselves in concrete ways. I like the color green. My friend over here, she also likes the color green, things like that. So just for example, another scenario here, if you have a little four-year-old girl, for example, who is very interested in princesses, For a while there, it was Princess Elsa from Frozen. I don't know if that's still an obsession among little girls, but for a while there, every little girl wanted to be Elsa. So let's say she's, really interested in princesses, Frozen, whatever, and she's getting ready to go to preschool, and her mom, is like, hey, how about you put on some jeans, long sleeve shirt, it's kind of cold outside. The child might not come out in what her mom said. She's probably going to come out in, might come out in a princess dress and a tiara. So that's just identifying or starting to build that sense of self based on their interests. And at this stage, young children really find opportunities to assert that growing individuality and independence. Dressing like a princess if they want to. And this dressing is really going to be a prevalent way that this really shows up, that independence. I remember when my parents started letting us kids dress themselves. I had a brother, my youngest brother, he wore snow boots for an entire year out of his life. Snow boots were his thing. And it didn't matter if it was 90 degrees outside in the summer. He wore them to soccer practice. He wore them literally everywhere. So it can be really, really prevalent in this stage to assert independence in that way. It's really common in this stage to hear the words, I want to do this by myself, as the child really increases capacity for completing daily tasks independently. And it can be a challenging time, both for the caregiver or also for the caregiver who has to really try to balance their own preferences and kind of those needs for individuality and growth with their child's growing need for independence. Elementary years, this is when kids are going to start developing their unique self. During this phase, understanding of self really expands to kind of incorporate the experiences of multiple domains of a child's life. So not only do you have home life, but you also have, life at school, life at activities or extracurriculars, things like that. And so some of you might be able to think back to maybe a specific teacher or coach or someone else outside of your immediate family who really positively contributed to your growing sense of self, or even if it wasn't a positive contribution, who really strongly influenced you in this stage of your life. So we're kind of expanding here from just nuclear family at home into all these different domains now. We know that children focus a little bit more on concrete attributes and outcomes, really defining I'm a girl or I'm a boy, or I am strong or weak, I'm smart, I am, dumb, things like that. And attributes are often really going to be understood in dichotomies, kind of with those shades of gray developing over the course of this stage of the elementary years. Over time, a sense of self grows to encompass personal attributes, those personal likes and dislikes, and more individualized values. And interactions with caregivers continue to be really important to self-concept in this stage. But at the same time, responses of peers and teachers and other really key or prominent figures really begin to play a role in this early childhood elementary year stage as well. And so in a sense, that lens for self, it's really beginning to expand. Then we have the early adolescent stage, and this is going to be the time of emerging self. So during the early stage of adolescence, teens continue that process of establishing their identity, establishing self-worth, and through this process, and really with guidance from their caregivers, they establish a sense of self in relationship to societal rules and expectations. So again, you can see that we're broadening from home and school activities, all the way to broader society. And so during this stage, teens tend to advance their academic and extracurricular skills, tend to get more involved. They make and sustain friendships. They continue that process of gender identification, and they'll probably begin to explore intimate partner relationships. Young teens are also going to begin the process of kind of separating from their caregivers as they really strive for an increased sense of independence. Identification with a specific group often begins to emerge in this stage, kind of as that peer group has a growing influence on a teen's self-concept. Friendships, peer groups become really important in this stage. And then finally, young teens might try on, I don't know if that's, yeah, they might try on different attributes, kind of in that attempt to crystallize and more concretely define their sense of self. So those teenage stages that teenagers might go through, you know, you hear it's just a phase. That's kind of their attempt at solidifying their identity at this point. And then last one that we're going to talk about here is late adolescence, which is this stage kind of becomes more about the abstract self. And so at this point, there's going to be an increasing independence as older teens go to school, get vocational training, enter the workforce, go to college. And identity in this phase integrates both past and current experiences, as well as future goals. And although the older teens often struggle to connect current actions and behaviors and interactions to future outcomes, they're still trying to define those goals. So they might not be the best at it at this point, really understanding how, hey, what I do now is going to have this effect in the future, but they still have that interest in planning for the future. They're just not practiced at it yet necessarily. We know the older teens also experience significant changes in their capacity to think, kind of changing from concrete thinking to more abstract thought, and they're increasingly able to understand abstract ideas, think about possibilities, think ahead, empathize with others, and abstract concepts and ideas are now incorporated into their broader sense of self. This is also a time when older teens experience a growing awareness of their self in general, and their peer group might have an increasing influence on them, again, still with that peer group. And this can really result in an increased sensitivity and sometimes even negative self-evaluation based on their peer group around them. So that's just a very quick overview of different developmental stages. But moving on, so some of the key developmental tasks that we discussed, just briefly there, were exploration, connection, development of self-concept, self-worth, pride, self-esteem, independence, things like that. And so as we go through this today, just take a second to think about the ways that we've talked about how trauma can affect children and teens and how these different tasks of development might be influenced by traumatic experiences. Just keep that in the back of your head today, and try to remember how trauma can really negatively affect or positively affect these stages of development. So going into layers of self, we know identity development kind of rests on the foundation of trust and care provided by the primary attachment system. The reflected lens for self is grounded in the actions and the behaviors and the interactions that children have with their earliest caregivers. And over time, these experiences are internalized and become the very earliest representation of self for a child. So a child might think, for example, if I'm punished, then I must be bad. Or if no one cares for me, then I must be, unlovable or unworthy of caring, things like that. So it's kind of one of those examples of how maybe a traumatic childhood could affect that sense of self or worth. We know that a child's early attachments and internalized model for self is going to influence their level of engagement with the world. Children and teens who've experienced trauma, like we talked about, often really self-protect by disconnecting or disengaging. And we know that if engagement is sacrificed for survival, then there's going to be fewer opportunities to experience the self as capable and powerful and able to create change. And this might make them more likely to experience themselves as, weak, unsuccessful, incapable. We know that disconnection, disengagement, and inconsistency in the caregiving environment really prevents children or teens who've experienced trauma from being exposed to the same range of opportunities experienced by their peers who haven't had those traumatic experiences. And the growing sense of self as, incapable, weak, unsuccessful can really impede curiosity, vision, belief in the future, things like that. Let me get my PowerPoint cut up here. So here on the slide here, it says that over time, our lens of self becomes the filter through which we interpret our experiences. If we see ourselves as smart and fail a test, we believe that the test was too hard. If we see ourselves as stupid and pass the test, we believe that we got lucky or the test was too easy. I think that's a really interesting thing to think about. So if you think about your own filters, are there areas in your life where you feel really successful and confident and competent? And then are there those areas in your life where you feel really unsuccessful or lack confidence? How do these different filters influence your actions and your behaviors and your interactions? I won't make you guys answer that, but just think. I think this is a very interesting illustration here. And then it says here on the slide, if you guys are following along, it says, as a result, each new experience reinforces our filter. It becomes harder and harder to change our sense of self over time. It begins to become really ingrained. So they have an example here. Let's say that you have a trainer. The reflective lens of the audience. I do not know what's happening. I can't. Sorry if there's so much noise. It says that all of you guys are muted. I think I'm just having issues with my computer and my mic today. So let's say, for example, that you have a trainer. The reflected lens of the audience, so the audience is going to be the one that provides that reflected lens. The reflected lens of the audience contributes to the development of the trainer's identity as a trainer. So based on what the audience thinks of the trainer, that's really going to affect his identity as a trainer. If a trainer gave his first training and most of the evaluations were unfavorable, it's going to be likely that his sense of competence as a trainer would decrease. If he went on to complete a second training and 70% of the evaluations were favorable and 30% were unfavorable, it's likely that the trainer would pay more attention to the 30% that were unfavorable, which would further affect his sense of competence in this area. If the trainer chooses to continue and completes a third training and 95% of the evaluations were favorable and only 5% were unfavorable, it is still likely that the trainer would pay more attention to the 5% than the 95% and conclude that he is not a great trainer. The more experiences the trainer has with unfavorable evaluations, regardless of percentages, the more likely he will interpret them to mean that training is not a strength of his. This process occurs for children and teens who've experienced trauma, but the effect on identity is likely to be more global. So saying those definitive statements like, I am bad, I am worthless, I'm a damaged person, it's likely to be more global in that sense rather than kind of a specific to like the role or context. So like, I'm a bad trainer. That's just an example. You see that he started off this endeavor of training with really negative reviews, and he kind of let that be ingrained and continued to carry that regardless of improvement in himself. And so he seemed to be blinded by that previous experience that he had. So that's just a little example of how our filters and our reflected lens can really affect us. So have any of the children or teens that you've cared for acted as if they're helpless, refused to try new things, gotten upset very easily, blamed themselves for things, or said they aren't good at certain things, or seemed unable to think of things to do, play, or try. That's probably going to be a pretty common, you guys have probably experienced that. Correct? Yes, yes, I'm going to say probably so. So, going all the way back to session 1, we talked about trauma shapes the way that children and teens understand and make meaning about their world. That's that lens. We talked about the lens in almost every single session. And they're going to develop a sense of self based on their early experiences, including their successes and their failures, the labels that people use about them, and their ability to influence or not influence the world around them. So labels, we talked about that. How, I don't remember what session it was, maybe 4, but labels like the manipulator, a foster kid, a liar. Those are all things I've heard about in my experience of working with kiddos in foster care. Sometimes people are really quick to tack those labels onto kids, and sometimes they do it in front of the child. Those kind of negative valuations can really be internalized. And then we talked about the importance of giving children choices when we're able, when it's safe, because a lot of times, like it says here, a lot of times they feel like they don't have the ability to influence the world around them. So giving them those opportunities to influence the world around them when it is safe. So all of these things, early experiences, labels, ability to influence or not influence the world, is going to develop and shape that sense of self. Now, the cool thing is that we have the power to help shift a child's lens. Notice it says shift there. It doesn't say that we can, completely rewrite it, but we can kind of shift the lens onto something else that might be more positive and fruitful for a child. So as we've talked about previously, relationships have a really powerful influence on kids' developing sense of self. The reflective lens of how children are seen by others can either reinforce or challenge the filter of shame and vulnerability and damage. And so in the next couple slides, we're going to talk about specific ways that we can contribute to a child or teen's developing sense of self in a really positive way. So the first thing that we can kind of help them shift that lens is going to be helping them to explore their unique sense of self. And this is a lot of information here on the slide, so just bear with me. So the main goal here is going to be to support children and teens in exploring and identifying and celebrating all their different qualities that make them who they are. So we can do this a couple different ways. They have some examples here. Providing opportunities for self-expression, whether that's with clothing, hair, the way they decorate their room, whatever. Let them have those opportunities to express themselves and be themselves. Helping them to identify and name their patterns. You pick up new ideas quickly, things like that. This can really help them gain self-awareness and help them to begin to name and identify their own feelings and positive attributes that they have. Create space for each child to contribute their unique contributions. Let them do that. Give them that space. Support opportunities to identify and explore new ideas, new interests. The big thing is picking your battles, picking your hill to die on, especially for teenagers like we talked about. We know that them being able to express themselves is going to be crucial. So pick your battles. If it's not important, if it's not dangerous, let them listen to the music that they want to. Let them, do their hair the way they want to. Things like that. Another way to help them explore their unique sense of self is to be curious. Try to learn just about them and what influences them and how they think. And then the final thing is to allow space for things important to the child or teen, whether that's, religion, rituals, holidays, things like that. We've talked about in previous sessions, coming into a completely new home, meeting a new child who might already have some of these routines and preferences in place. Try to respect those when you can and allow space for them. We can also help kids shift their lens by helping them to build positive self. And so the main goal is going to be to help kiddos become more aware of their positive attributes and feel successful. So again, allowing kids to try out new interests. Sometimes some kiddos are going to need help redefining what success means, whether that's in an hour, a day, a month, just a single moment, and really looking for those periods of success, even on the hardest days, not just the really easy and good days, quote unquote. Find one success moment each day and praise it, even if it's something little like, hey, good job, you brushed your teeth. Hang things up, show them off, whether that's homework, grade cards, art that they've done. Foster success by engaging in activities with your child or teen. Kind of come alongside them in that way. Support them, don't criticize them. It says here that for every negative a child or teen hears, make sure that there's 10 positives. And we've discussed that before as well, how it's easy to focus on the negatives. And sometimes we don't give enough attention or praise just to the positive things, even when they are little, like brushing your teeth. And then the final thing to help kiddos build positive sense of self is notice small moments of success, even for behavior that's expected. Again, the brushing your teeth thing, thanks for being a great helper, thanks for putting your dishes in the sink, things like that. The next way we can shift that lens for kiddos is tolerating their vulnerable self. So the goal here is to help young people tolerate the challenges of life and see them more as experiences, and to make sure that those challenges in life, that you don't let them define themselves by those challenges, that they're not self-definition. So we can do this by acknowledging and normalizing challenges. Everyone makes mistakes. I'm sorry we had such a hard day. Try to tolerate their feelings, even if you don't really agree or understand. This lets kiddos know that their feelings are acceptable. It's back to that lens and that kind of idea that regardless of whether or not we understand, a child's perception is going to be their truth. And they're experiencing very real things, whether or not it makes sense or is actual truth to us. Mirroring and supporting before trying to shift or change a child or teen's feelings. Even painful feelings are going to be a part of our experience of life. Talking about their behavior specifically, not talking about them as a kid or a person, but talking about the behavior specifically. So kind of, I'm frustrated when you do this, not like you're such a pain in my butt type of thing. Don't label your child or teen. Really try to avoid it. We've talked about the negative effect that labels can have, and how those can be internalized really easily and impressioned on children and teens quite quickly if we're not careful. And then don't limit their possibilities. Be really realistic and supportive, but don't assume that a child or teen's past challenges are going to define their future. So even though we want to support youth in developing and sustaining a really positive sense of self, the reality is going to be that children in your care have experienced and continue to experience a lot of different hard moments. That's just a fact of it. Tolerating vulnerability, like they suggest here, can really be hard for anybody, including foster parents, and disconnecting from those vulnerable experiences might be a coping strategy for youth or for caregivers. An important role that you can play is just to support children and teens in learning to tolerate those harder and more vulnerable parts of who they are and see them only as just one aspect of their identity. And as a caregiver, it can be really hard to do. Remember that toolbox that we talked about? Preparing yourself, those in your pocket tools, recovery tools, ongoing self-care tools. That was a really good session. If you guys weren't here for it, you can always look up these sessions and get the materials for them on, if you just Google Annie E. Casey Foundation, ARC trainings. All this is available online. So if you weren't there for it, they have some really good tools that we discussed. But remembering that toolbox and using that toolbox to help you regulate your responses to your child's emotional expression. And this is really going to help send a message that all emotions make sense and are accepted by you, and they're accepted in your home. It's a safe area to express emotion. So some of those strategies that we can consider for supporting a child's vulnerable self include that mirroring that we had that session on, I think session 6. We talked about how mirroring is a really important tool for helping children to tolerate vulnerability, because you can use language to mirror, you can validate and normalize challenges that they're experiencing with emotions and relationships and interactions and just all sorts of different situations. You can also use regulation strategies, supporting the children and using the regulation toolbox when vulnerability causes that internal distress or discomfort. Again, avoiding the labels. We know that children who've experienced trauma have internalized a lot of different labels over the course of their lives, and a lot of those labels are going to be incorporated into their definition of self. So avoiding the labels can really help separate behaviors from the individual child. And then the final thing is being a holder of hope. We know that people in general are resilient and have the capacity to grow and change in the right environment where that's nourished. And so conveying your belief that, that the child or teen can grow and change and that anything and everything is possible can really give hope and balance the need for imagination and dreams with those realistic goals. So that was a lot of information. And then we're going to go into just past, present, and future really quickly here. And then we're going to talk about Olivia again, because we always have to talk about Olivia. So shifting the lens is also going to involve honoring the past. So past experience, we know, plays a really significant role in identity development. We know that your past experiences, especially for children who are involved with trauma, that's basically how they built who they are off those experiences. Remember that part of what makes children or teens or people unique might be grounded in their past experiences, whether that's cultural influences, values, whatever. And it's going to be really important for children to have the opportunity to reflect on and honor and share those past experiences with the current caregiver. Foster parents can support this process by being actively curious about the child or teen's past, including those relationships, schools, family experiences, things like that. So honoring the past isn't necessarily going to be an easy and happy experience. It can be really tough because honestly, there's probably going to be a lot of hard things. If a child in your home has a different racial or ethnic or religious background, a different sexual identity, different gender identity than your family as a whole, providing them with opportunities to explore and integrate the aspect of their identity through whether it's community activities, groups, things like that is really important. We know that past experience is likely to include both those positive and those not so positive memories, especially when it comes to those family relationships. And so it's going to be important to invite both positive and negative memories into the conversation and to work with your child's team to determine the best approach to supporting that traumatic sharing of content. We know that identity development is significantly affected by fragmentation, and that fragmentation occurs when children have experienced multiple changes in their caregiving system. And so for kiddos in foster care, kiddos who have gone through trauma, there's probably going to be more fragmentation in their lives. Moving from placement to placement, caregiver to caregiver, things like that, maybe city to city, school to school. And so a lot of this work is going to be about supporting continuity and cohesion and integration of experiences, both, again, positive and negative, but supporting that integration of experiences across time and context. So while we honor the past, we also try to capture the present. So the goal here is to preserve a child's or teen's life experience while they live with you. So it's going to be really common for children who've experienced trauma to miss out on, the refrigerated display or the keepsake boxes or the photo albums, those types of experience. And we know that in a lot of families, caregivers maintain a keepsake box of their child's artwork, report cards, milestones, things like that, an album of photos from different developmental stages. And children and teens might, from time to time, kind of ask to look at these things as a way to integrate their different experiences, as a way to remember their different experiences. And children who, children who spend a period of time in foster care sometimes receive a goodbye book when transitioning from that setting. But the book, sometimes only captures a small part of their experience. And so the goal is to provide children with the normative experience of having their accomplishments on display in the present moment, to be able to be available later to support holding on to past experiences that we talked about in the previous slide there. So some examples that they have here, taking pictures, saving schoolwork, framing artwork, keeping a height chart, making a keepsake box, things that you can do not just at the end of the child's time with you, if and when that time comes, but kind of in the moment on a daily basis. Do you guys have any additional ideas or strategies that you use for children to capture their current experience that you guys want to share at all? Oops, I have to unmute you. Oops. I think you're unmuted. If you want to share. Again, you don't have to, but those are just some ideas there. Oh, and it says here on the side, it says, don't let parts of kids' life disappear. And then finally, we have building the future. So the goal in helping a child shift their lens, build their future, is to help young people explore, imagine, and build toward the many possible paths that lie ahead. So examples of how we can do this. With young children, allow and support creative and dramatic play. We know that exploration and imagination are the foundation of the future self. So whenever you can engage with them, provide opportunities for them to be goodness, I do not know what's happening. Provide opportunities for them to be imaginative. Sorry, I have to get a drink here. It's a lot of talking today. Help children and teens identify goals, both short-term and long-term. We had a previous session that kind of discussed that. And also not only identify those goals, but help them develop a plan to follow through with them, support them through the different steps of that, build real-world skills in adolescence, help them explore their academic interests, their vocational interests, be their cheerleaders, support them. Don't expect independence too soon. Don't push that too soon. Help children and teens visualize the future. Think beyond just jobs and school. Ask about where they want to live, what kind of relationships they want, broader things. Maybe some of those more abstract concepts of, what do you want in a future partner or future family? Things like that. And then balance imagination and reality. Allows them to dream, but also identify how they can gain needed skills and develop talents and interests. I know I worked with a teenager who he really wanted to become a truck driver. And so I know that his foster parent, instead of, hey, you know, that's great, good for you, he actually helped him take the steps to research, okay, what kind of qualifications do you need to be a truck driver? What kind of testing do you need to take? How does it vary from state to state? What's the cost associated with that? Things like that. We have here someone in the chat said that they're always supportive of their kids' relationships with their birth family. So kind of, I think, going back to last slide there, capturing the present, supportive of those relationships, the birth family. They can talk about their mother at any time. The wife and I always speak positively about their bio family. It's a way that they can stay connected with that part of their past. So yes, honoring the past there, that's really important, especially with biological families. Like it mentioned here, that family experience is going to be one of those things, like it's probably going to have some positives, but it's also probably going to be one of those categories that has a lot of those negatives as well. And so I know some families really struggle to have positive feelings and support positive feelings about bio family. So Felicia and Rose, good for you guys for being able to really support that in your home. That is a hard thing to do, but also really important. And it communicates that respect to children that, hey, this was a big part of your life, and like we acknowledge that, and we respect that. Like that helps shape you, and that doesn't have to be all bad. So honoring the past, how'd they say it? Capturing the present and then building the future. So Olivia, checking on her, kind of the ways that Olivia's foster parents are supporting her identity. If you guys have followed along, Olivia is a character who has kind of watched her from like toddlerhood all the way up until now with her current foster placement. And they kind of just use her as an illustration of our different lessons. So it says that Olivia is now 9 years old and has been living with her foster parents for almost 3 years. Her parents have learned a lot about her. She loves to dance and sing and has a dramatic flair. She shines on stage. Her foster parents worked with the school to find an arts-based after-school program that has regular performances. She often brings home special projects. Her foster parents have set up a wall in the kitchen to display her artwork. They also make a keepsake box for special crafts, photos, assignments, and other mementos. So for a lot of children in care, supporting identity means helping them navigate relationships with their family of origin, kind of like we just talked about in our example that was shared in chat. We know that these relationships can support a greater understanding of self, talking about that history, and also a greater understanding of culture and context. But sometimes it might come at a cost for foster parents. So here with Olivia, it says that she is developing a relationship with a maternal great aunt. They had little contact before Olivia entered foster care, but her aunt is now bringing her to church and introducing her to extended family members. Olivia's foster parents struggled to support this relationship at first because the visits often left Olivia feeling very emotional and dysregulated. Over time, her foster parents have begun to feel grateful that Olivia is developing a strong connection to family members and learning about her cultural roots. Oh gosh, sorry, not keeping up with my PowerPoint. It says, as visits with her aunt have increased, Olivia has begun to share positive memories of her parents with whom she no longer has contact and is expressing a profound sense of grief. This brings up a lot of feelings for Olivia's foster parents, who feel angry at Olivia's parents for all they did to her, for their inconsistency in visiting her over the years. Despite this, they work hard to listen to and acknowledge Olivia's wishes and sadness. And then finally, it says, Olivia's behavior has improved greatly over the years. She still has some hard days, but she seems more confident. She's mostly able to be independent at an age-appropriate way and can generally tolerate her foster parents' feedback when she makes mistakes. Her foster parents have gone from having to look for opportunities to tell her they're proud to genuinely feeling proud of all she has accomplished. They feel much more confident in their own ability to get through hard days. So, if you guys were here at the beginning, we can see that Olivia's grown a lot. A lot of things have changed. Specifically, it says there her foster parents have gone from having to look for opportunities to tell her they're proud. In previous sessions, that was a real struggle for her foster parents. It was kind of all negative there for a while, but I mean, this is over a course of 3 years. So growth like this takes time. It's not just snap the fingers, like let's implement these things and things are going to change. So Olivia and her little scenario here is kind of a demonstration of that. It's hard work and is going to take a lot of effort. So that's just a little update on her. We did not go as short as I thought we were going to today. That took a lot longer than I thought. But to wrap up, we know identity develops in stages over time. Trauma can have a really profound effect on sense of self, and identity can influence our lens and filter for ongoing experiences. Foster parents can have a significant influence on a child or teen's sense of self by helping him or her to explore their unique qualities, to build positive experiences, tolerate vulnerability, and then holding on to their past, present, and future. Self-reflection today. This is, as always, optional, just a little thing to chew on. Thinking about your own identity, try to, they just have a little list of things here. Try to identify one thing that you believe defines you, whether that's a value, a cultural influence, a role that you have. But try to identify one thing that you believe defines you, one thing that you take pride in, one thing that challenges you about yourself or gives you a feeling of vulnerability, one thing that you've held on to from your past that continues to feel important to you, and one thing that's a future goal for you. It says to talk about these things in pairs. We don't have pairs, I'm sorry. But if you're wanting to do a little bit more self-reflection about today's session, just think about a couple of those things in your own identity. Apply them to yourself. Practice this week. They ask that you review the ideas for positive and unique self and identify one way that you can actively support a child or teen in your home in either of those areas. So whether that's, exploring unique self-expression opportunities, supporting exploration of new interests, identifying and naming patterns, etc., or that building of the positive self, which is finding success in the day and praising it, even if it's something small, tiny, supporting, not criticizing, things like that. And make a note of it if you want to. And that is it. Ooh, oops, went too far. Here's the last slide. Last session is going to be next Monday. That is our 9th session. Monday, I think it's the 8th. Sorry, I lost my slide here. Yes, Monday, July 8th, noon. That is the last one in this series. So hopefully I'll see you guys. Let me make sure I got everyone. I have Cynthia, I have Felicia and Rose. I didn't get Rose. Rose, Julie, Johnny Hughes, Trevor, and Savannah. Okay, I think I have all of you guys. So just remember to do those evaluations that were emailed to you so you can get credit. And otherwise, you guys are free. Thank you so much.
Could you show slide 32 again?
Let me look. What was the title?
I can't remember. It was the one that had the different things that you could, about the activity. I wanted to take a screenshot of that so we could do that.
Oh, golly. Let me see here.
I remember it was 32. I caught it after the next one. I'm sorry.
The practice slide, I have number 32 as being the practice slide. Is it, which activities?
It asks the question, things that, what challenges you, what you take pride in, those questions. I thought it was
yes.
32.
Yes. Right here. Yep, I have it as 31, but is this it? Can you see it? Oh gosh, I don't know why it keeps doing this. I'm technologically not very great sometimes. Can you see that about your own identity?
No, I can't see it now.
Okay, here, let me reshare it for you. Let me reshare it and you should be able to see it. Can you see it now?
Yes. Let me see if I can screenshot that.
And like I said, all of these PowerPoints are actually available for free online to download. And so if the screenshot doesn't work, I can tell you how to Google and get to all the materials.
Okay, it did it. I never tried it before, so now I know it works.
Well, if you can't find it, You can always Google Annie E. Casey Foundation ART training, and they can be there for you.
Okay, thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks so much. We'll see you guys hopefully next week.
Thank you.